Let's get this started. Hafade and Tiro. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are here with Vana Quichoco, who earned a master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of Guam this past year. The topic of her presentation is Håyi Ham På'go, understanding how CHamoru identity and acculturation styles affect the psychological well-being of third generation World War II Chamorro people of Guam. This presentation is part of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's Humanities Fridays events, scheduled at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. each Friday in the month of October in celebration of Sinamai Humanities Month. If you want more information about this and other upcoming events, please visit www.nmhcouncil.org. Now, before I turn it over to Vana, I want the audience to know that their microphones will be muted for the duration of the presentation. You may make a comment or question at any time using the chat feature. And then we'll make time at the end of her presentation to address any of the questions that you pose. And I will also be on hand to assist by reading them aloud. And I'll try to do that in the order received. For those of you tuning in on our Facebook site, you can send your questions by messaging the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's Facebook page. So Vana, thank you for being here and for sharing your work. Please feel free to begin your presentation when you're ready.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Pangilinan. Please forgive me if at any time in this presentation my Wi-Fi gets a little wobbly. I'm gonna do my best though. So hello everyone, thank you for coming. Buenas and Hafade. My name is Vana Quichoco. I have been a student at the University of Guam since 2012, and in 2017 I received a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and English Literature. And as Mr. Pangilinan said, in 2020, just this past May, I received my Master of Science in Clinical Psychology. Okay, so this was my thesis topic, Håyi Ham På'go, understanding how Chamorro identity and acculturation styles affect the psychological well-being of third generation World War II Chamorro people in Guam. Now, that's a mouthful, I'm aware. So breaking it down, what I'm really trying to ask, or I guess what I really studied was, how does our level of Chamorro identity and how we interact with other cultures affect how happy and how healthy we are? So for the purpose of this project, the population I worked with were third generation people. So basically, if your grandparents were alive during World War II, this is my grandmother. She was alive during World War II. And I also looked at the ages of 18 to 25. My sample pool was made up of University of Guam students because I was a University of Guam graduate researcher. And this project, again, only focused on the population on Guam. I'll be talking later about how the project could be expanded for other populations in the Marianas Islands and other members of the Chamorro population. But please keep in mind that for this project, this was my focus because this was the scope that I was able to accomplish during my studies. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over some concepts that were used in my project. So when I looked at psychological well-being, these are the concepts that I looked at. I looked at a person's level of independence, how able they were to manage their daily tasks, how open they were to personal growth, how well they could form and keep positive relationships, whether or not they had a clear purpose in life, and their ability to accept themselves. Okay, and when I talk about acculturation, basically what I'm looking at is the way that your indigenous culture or your host culture interacts with an outside culture. So for the purpose of this, it would be the Chamorro culture on Guam interacting with the American culture, the dominant other culture. According to Berry, for acculturation, the rate and the style of your acculturation can be experienced differently by people who are in the same culture. And some of the social and cultural factors that may affect mental health having to do with acculturation would be the settlement patterns, your status in the community, the level of social support you have, and whether or not you accept the acculturation. Some of the psychological characteristics are contact experiences, so your experiences with the dominant culture, the motivation for the contact, your age, your education, sex, marital status, and that will come into play when I talk about my participants a little bit more. Okay, so there are 4 styles of acculturation. Integration would be the host culture and the other culture. So you integrate both of them. Separation is you just stick with your original indigenous culture and you reject that outside dominant culture. Assimilation is you reject your own culture and you follow that dominant outside culture. And marginalization is you split from both your indigenous culture and that dominant culture, and you find a 3rd route or a 4th route. Okay, and really quickly, I was interested in that because, especially going back into looking at 3rd generation World War II CHamoros, I just wanted to see how are Chamorro people on Guam in this generation, how do they view the Western culture? I was really interested in looking at these acculturation styles because I wasn't able to find much about it when I was looking into it. So I wanted to see, is it possible that there's a majority of one of the styles? Are all of the styles present? Are some of them not present? Just getting some kind of baseline. Okay, and cultural identity. So from the research that I found, there are 2 levels, the group level, so that basically defining the culture, and the individual level. So that's your unique way that you view and you experience the culture. And for individual cultural identity, it's different from other people in the group, and it's constructed by your personal experiences. Also, it was found that strong cultural identity clarity is strong cultural identity clarity has been proven to show that there's improved well-being in others. Cultural identity, again, is shaped through the people that you are with, the people you surround yourself with, and it's important for forming your own self-identity. So you don't really understand yourself unless you understand your culture and your cultural identity. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so when I'm looking at Chamorro identity, the questions I had were, is there a present Chamorro identity? Are there people on Guam who maybe don't have a present Chamorro identity? Is the identity strong? Is it clear? How does one define their Chamorro identity? And how does one display or experience that Chamorro identity? And then I also wanted to know, can a strong Chamorro identity or strong Chamorro identity clarity protect one against like psychological distress? Could it be good for your well-being, the stronger or the more connected you are to your culture? Okay, and all of that, again, tying into the 3rd generation, stemmed off of intergenerational trauma. So this is something that I was really interested when I was learning about it at the University of Guam. Basically, intergenerational trauma is traumatic experiences such as war, again, World War II, that's passed along through the generations, and it could be passed along unintentionally and unconsciously. And this first instance of trauma creates a ripple effect that passes down through the generations. So whatever your grandparents have experienced could pass down to your parents, could pass down to you. So there's 2 ways that it could be transmitted. First, directly. So that's children or grandchildren modeling how their parents are, or indirectly, when maybe a parent or a grandparent's actions cause a child to learn something and then they act that out later. Okay, then these are some features of intergenerational trauma. So in the 1st generation, it would be some dissociation, self-harm, Substance abuse, that's a big one in the islands. In the family unit, struggle with intimacy, like struggle with telling your family members you love them, conflict in your relationship with your family members, levels of guilt, frustration, and anger. If you have maybe relatives that are always angry. And in the second generation, what was found was PTSD, separation problems, low self-esteem, and difficulty controlling your aggression, maintaining relationships, solving conflicts, trusting others. So these are all things found in the first and the second generation, but there's not really much done on the third generation. And I was wondering, is that because the trauma just disappears, or is it because maybe people don't think that it could have passed this far? So that's another thing that I wanted to uncover. Okay, so some of the more local and regional research that was done on intergenerational trauma, this is by Dr. Timinglow at Guam's DOC. So her dissertation for her PhD was about the soul wound. Basically, that's your internalized self-hatred acquired from being colonized. And that, she says, directly influences high rates of alcohol and substance abuse, violent crimes, and high suicide rates, as well as a concept of pain of loss. So pain that arises from losing certain cultural things. And an example of that would be on Guam, the stories of Chief Harao and Chief Matapang rewritten as troublemakers, kind of to adapt to that main narrative of they were opposed to the colonial power, so they were bad. A lot of people I know use the word Matapang to mean something negative, when further research into that chief shows that he actually did a lot of really courageous stuff. So again, we're taught things that are different. And then the last one would be pain of the neglected. So how the rights of Chamorro people have been neglected from the United States. So Dr. Timinglow says that Chamorro people are confused about their identity because they were told that they're inferior and invalid. And that kind of internal dialogue leads to having mental health concerns. And another study by Dr. Juan Rapadas, he says that World War II is still impactful on Chamorros today. His study again focused on the first and the second generation. He kind of relates it to PTSD, but he says PTSD would be too inadequate and simplistic to describe what the people of Guam who went through World War II experienced. And he says that World War II left certain traumatic debris, such as medical conditions, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and cancer, high levels of family violence, substance abuse, suicide, crimes, and seizure of lands. And some of his recommendations were public apologies from colonizers, war reparations, more therapy, more research being done, reinvigorating the matrilineal tradition, and also collaborating with the Catholic Church. So one way that I'm adding to this is, again, through research, which is what he recommended. And that leads to my research. So basically, what I wanted to do is I wanted to gather all those questions, go into all those concepts that I mentioned earlier. And I did a double qualitative method. So basically what I did was interviews. I like qualitative inquiry because it's basically stories. And I know the Chamorro culture really values the oral tradition. So what better way to learn more about people's experiences than to have them tell stories? So I had 10 participants, again, University of Guam students. I used a convenient sample because that's all I have. I would have loved to reach out to more people all over the island, all over the other islands, just to get a better view of this. This was just a master's thesis. Maybe in my PhD dissertation, I could tap into that. And I had two phases. So first I had a group interview just to kind of test the information. A lot of the questions that I had about Chamorro identity and acculturation were stuff that I read about for the project. And again, this was focused on first generation, second generation. So I kind of wanted to see, okay, would those questions or would those topics still be applicable to this group? Or maybe should I phrase things in a different way for the individual interview? So all my 10 participants were present in that first phase. And then in the second phase, I sat down with them one-on-one over Zoom, sadly, because this was done right at the beginning of the pandemic. So one-on-one over Zoom. I recorded the information, I coded it, and I extracted the themes. And what I'm going to present next would be the themes that I found from these interviews. So this is my participant pool. Again, the ages 18 to actually 21. I was looking for 25, but 18 to 21 is good. Like I said, location could also be a factor of acculturation. So some of the demographics here reflect that information that I was looking for. Okay. Oh, and again, I will be reading their stories. I have a lot of quotes. Bear in mind, I think that their stories are the most interesting part of the research. I'll also talk a little bit about some of the questions that were asked. So one of the most interesting things that I found from the group interview was that when I asked questions about Chamorro identity, some of the participants related it in a way that expressed it was a journey of discovering or uncovering or reinvigorating their Chamorro identity. So in the individual questions, I really wanted them to just tell me the story of their journey with the Chamorro identity. So here are some of the themes that I found. Some of the participants said that they were never explicitly taught how to be Chamorro. So one of my participants said, when I was small, I didn't really understand what my culture or race was. I really had no connection with the Chamorro culture, even though I was surrounded by my family all the time. He told a story that there was a time he thought he was Filipino because all of his friends were Filipino. So it just made sense to him. You know, he was in elementary school. He's like, okay, they're all Filipino. I must be Filipino. And then he told me how he told his grandma, oh, grandma, can you teach me more Tagalog? And she's like, boy, I don't know Tagalog, we're Chamorro. And it didn't really click until that moment. He was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm Chamorro. Another theme was that maturing or just growing up led to exploring your identity more. So another participant said, it never really became a big part of my identity when I was younger, because I felt at that point I just didn't connect it with anything. I didn't really know exactly what any of that meant, or it just didn't hold any significance to me. I think it wasn't until around high school where you get used to the feeling of being more self-aware. Okay, and then another one was just involvement with Chamorro cultural events. So another one said proximity, a lot of it was the community activities, the infinite numbers of rosaries and funerals and fiestas and christenings that my parents would drag me along to when I was a kid. When I was growing up, it took me a while to realize, oh, that's just not something that everybody does. Okay, then when it comes to expressing their culture, almost all of the participants were able to say that they embody the values of family, community, respect, and sanctity of land. So a lot of them were taught respect from a young age, with others, with the land. They were told to pray before they go into the jungle, stuff like that. Family was one of the big things that they said is crucial to being Chamorro. When you're Chamorro, you think of your family. Some of them said Chamorro identity is very much connected to the land. So they've been learning about plants, learning more about the different words for nature, like air, the water, and so on. Someone even said just being friendly, being hospitable is another way to embody those Chamorro values. Okay. All of the participants we found in the first group session did not learn how to speak Chamorro growing up. And majority of them, I want to say maybe 8 or 9 out of 10, are actively learning how to speak now. So they're in extracurricular activities learning, they're taking classes at the University of Guam, they're telling their aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, only speak to me in Chamorro so I get a feeling of the language and more vocabulary. And then they also relate that to music. They listen to a lot of Chamorro music, they pick up the songs. One of the participants says that he learns language through learning the music. That's kind of a better memory device for him. Okay. Again, with nature, A lot of them say they like to plant, they like to farm. Also, Chamorro food was a big one. One of my participants said, I asked my dad, what does it mean to be Chamorro? And he directly went into food. He said, do you eat Chamorro food? And that's a big part of it. One of them said red rice is integral to his Chamorro identity. Fair, valid. Okay, when I asked them how they claim their Chamorro identity. So basically, I just asked them, what do you do that makes you feel Chamorro? How confident and how comfortable are you saying that you're Chamorro? Some of them said, I can say it, but it depends who I'm around when I say it. Some of them say that I don't think I need to prove myself because, I'm just Chamorro. And some of them said that they're comfortable, but they're not confident. It was a very conflicting kind of sense when talking about this. And I thought that was really interesting. One of the participants moved to the States for a while and went to school. And she said she loved telling everyone that she was Chamorro. She loved telling people she was from Guam because they didn't know where it was. And she liked teaching people about it. Okay. So I kind of went into this, but for example, one of the participants said, I think sometimes I get shy. I mean, I will not say I'm not Chamorro. I'll never say I'm not Chamorro. I think there are certain people on Guam I would be more afraid to assert my Chamorro identity around, just because when I compare myself, that creeps in and I feel like they're way more Chamorro than me. We got a lot of answers like this, especially when these participants, again, who are aged 18 to 21, are around older people, especially people who are fluent in Chamorro. That's usually when they kind of feel embarrassed to say I'm Chamorro. Sometimes they feel like they're misunderstood when they say it to others. Definitely there was a lot of frustration when people think that the participants are not Chamorro. So one of the participants said, a lot of people used to think I was Filipino. So for a little while that bothered me. And I never really made a connection as to why that bothered me. Like, I'm not Filipino Chamorro. It was mostly other people telling me. And I guess that frustration of not being able to be looked at and people knowing, oh yeah, you're Chamorro. A lot of them were trying to capture how they didn't really like that. It made them feel invalidated. Okay. Moving on to a question about the influence of your family and your family history on how you practice being Chamorro or how you view your Chamorro identity. A lot of the participants state that they were raised by their grandparents and their extended family. A lot of them mention their grandmas being their second mothers, teaching them maybe the language more so than their parents did, teaching them more about the culture and being connected to nature. Also, I found that the family ideals and the family disposition on certain things, such as American patriotism, Catholicism or Christianity, and supportive activism, shaped how the participants saw it. So if the participant's family was more patriotic, the participant would be more patriotic. If they were in support of activism, the participant would be more in support of activism. And that was pretty congruent for the most part. There were some that weren't, that I'll go into later. A history of low socioeconomic status influenced them. A lot of them stated that maybe their grandparents weren't as well off growing up, and that really shaped how they were raised growing up. Their grandparents would teach them how to be appreciative of everything they have and not to waste things and learn to connect more to the land. When the participants shared stories about or stories from their grandparents, a lot of them described their grandparents as resilient, as patient, caring, and strong. One of them said, of course, the many thousand things that stick out to me about my grandma is just how nurturing she is. She did so many things she didn't have to. They talk about how they're storytellers, and maybe it usually isn't the grandparents that tell the stories, that maybe it's the uncle or aunt who would be the one telling these stories, and even they see the grandparent as resilient and all of those things. Okay. So generational differences that were found, there was definitely a sense of difficulty with emotional expression. So the participants kind of learned from their grandparents and their parents how not to really communicate their feelings. So I kind of want to highlight this one story. I think there's this thing in Chamorro culture that a lot of our parents and our grandparents were raised with this whole don't show weakness type of ideal. Especially a lot of my generation, you can tell your parents you're feeling a certain way and be dismissed because how can you compare how good your life is versus theirs? Then a lot of these feelings get dismissed and almost invalidated. I feel like that causes a lot of problems later on in life, mentally, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually. I feel like I've experienced it myself a lot. Okay. Another generational difference would be religious incongruity. So like I was saying earlier, usually when the family is strong in their ideals, the participant is, but for some of them, religion was a big conflicting factor. And this participant said it was purely because, as she says, I talked to them a lot about it because my whole thing is its simple reason that CHamoru, this is not our actual religion. It was forced upon us. And my parents will blow that off as, yeah, I know, but still, that's it. Specifically going into World War II, some lingering effects that some of the participants have seen in their family. One participant said, I know my grandma still gets dreams. Sometimes she'll be sleeping and we'll hear her screaming at night. I think the war for her, she was 7 years old when it started. She wasn't very old. She told me she basically lived in the jungle. She lived off of a lot of like rotten fruits and vegetables. She said she didn't have much to eat and she still gets flashbacks. So it's still really present to their grandparents. And even to this day, it's as vivid as getting these flashbacks. Another thing is like the health issues that I mentioned. So this participant said, my grandma and like all of them got a whole bunch of health issues just relating to diet. I'm going to inherit diabetes on both sides. My mom makes spam fried rice for breakfast since like forever. I didn't realize people didn't like spam when you're outside of Guam. That was crazy to me. I guess like the struggles thing, like my grandma's diet was kind of ruined by that. Okay. Some participants state that they can visibly see how their family feels like they're indebted to the United States, to the military especially, for saving them. So this participant said they lost everything, their house and stuff. A lot of them, kind of like a lot of Chamorros, received the US military as their saviors. They really like the sound of, if we have a situation where we could have all been wiped out, I owe them my service. Another participant said, the biggest part is the indebtedness, the idea that we wouldn't be here without the Americans, that we should be grateful and we should be proud to call ourselves Americans. That idea was strong in my family. And then specifically into intergenerational trauma, we have a participant who said, on my mom's side, there's a reoccurring issue of how substance abuse has been a continual problem. A lot of beer, a lot of partying, and a lot of not knowing how to talk about your feelings. I have this experience with my cousin where we kind of look back and man, the things we grew up with were messed up. We just didn't realize it at the time because it was normalized. I don't know if there was ever domestic violence, but that was totally a thing. And another person said, the older I've gotten, the more I realize I don't think my parents dealt with their intergenerational trauma. I just don't think that's common. I don't even think they would understand that word because it's not part of their generation. And then I actually found some participants who said that they see no connections to World War II. One of them said, 3 out of 4 of my grandparents are all from Inarahan. So like, I know that the South didn't like feel that. I read somewhere that the South didn't feel a lot of, or as much of an impact and effect as the Central and the North did. Another person said, I'm sure they had some hardships, but they never really mentioned any. That was just a way of life. They're both really happy people. They can be moody, but they're just really happy. So that was interesting that there are some participants who didn't see any of that. I asked the participants about the influence of their peers and their environment on their Chamorro identity. One participant stated that there's been a shift in the air. I don't know if it's just because I'm more exposed to it or if it's been happening for a long, long time. Especially people within our age group, they're really leaning into their Chamorro-ness. They're leaning into Chamorro language and Chamorro culture. Being at the center of that, it moves me, as I'm sure it moves a lot of other people to want to learn more about culture and want to save it as much as possible. I feel like we, at least I and a lot of other people, feel responsible for it. And then some participants really think that social media has been helpful for them. One of them said, I'm better exposed to people with different opinions and experiences. Seeing that online helps expose me to that and helps me better understand how others experience Chamorro culture. I think there's a lot of people that are very open to sharing their experiences. This participant said he uses Twitter for that. And another participant says she uses Instagram. She follows Chamorro accounts that put like word of the day, different Chamorro words of the day, or old pictures, like pre-war pictures down south. We had a lot of coconut trees and stuff like that. Okay. I asked about whether they feel like their peers and environment influence them, and the majority answer was that supportive friends are really integral to supporting yourself and your journey with your Chamorro identity. So some of them stated that even if their friends aren't Chamorro, they support them learning the language or practicing the language with them. Some of them try to integrate it into their everyday language. Some of them try to go to events. They'll bring their non-Chamorro friends to the events as well. And then some of them, just as long as they're supportive of you and what you want to be and what you want to learn, they feel like that's important as well. Okay, and then I moved into the American identity. So I kind of wanted to relate their journey with Chamorro identity and Chamorro with their American identity. So one of the first big things was patriotism. One of them said, my mom's family is super Republican. My dad was in the army when he was my age, so he's very patriotic. And growing up, I always felt like I was an American citizen. I've always felt really strongly feelings of pride. It's hard not to, especially with military culture and how clean and precise and competent everything is. It's just so crazy how much of just the military has worked its way into my family. Conversely, someone said, when I was younger, I was like, paint my face red, white, and blue. Proud to be an American. And that comes from my grandpa really being proud of who he was and being grateful for the federal government, because not gonna lie, they did help my family a lot. Some of the westernization or Americanization did good for Guam, and it did good for a lot of families. That was instilled in me. And then another participant said that he thought that joining the military was a rite of passage as a man. He grew up thinking that. Okay, another big thing is just how present America and American culture is. No matter where you look, you see it. So one participant said, the really sad and crazy thing is I don't have to go out of my way to look for American things. It's in the TV shows I watch, it's in my goals, like wanting to have a big house, a nice car. Those are things that I correlate to being American. When it comes to my American identity, I'm American. I have American thoughts and speak American English. I think a lot of my qualities in wanting to revitalize Chamorro culture and speak Chamorro language and think about Chamorro identity and its importance, that comes from American practices and activism and ideals. And that's frustrating. Someone said, I think it's hard to draw a line, like what is the Americanness that I practice? Because how much of that is American culture and how much of that is a stereotype? Okay. And someone also said, a lot of things on Guam have been westernized, and it's hard to think of not being westernized because of it. Okay. Many of them related to the education system, helping with their American identity. We learn about it at school. We go to US accredited schools. The University of Guam is accredited in the United States. And some people really can see the differences in the groups. So someone said, I just remember being exposed and seeing some of it and not really liking what I saw. I can say I'm American, but sometimes I don't really like, I don't know, I'm just so disconnected from it. One of the participants who moved off island said that she went through serious culture shock and some slight racism. Okay, so through this project, I found that all of the participants demonstrated some sort of Chamorro identity. More so, they demonstrated Chamorro identity clarity. They recognizes how the culture influences their lives. They agree that the culture is not dying, it's improving, or it's evolving. Ooh. Sorry. They're conscious of their role and their generation's role in preservation and revitalization of the culture. That was one of my questions answered. Moving into the types of acculturation styles that each participant had, 2 of 10 emulated the separation style. So again, that's separating from that outside culture and sticking to your indigenous culture. So this is what they said. One of them said, I don't look at myself as American because I speak English and maybe because I enjoy country songs, but I don't think, yes, I'm a proud American. If I'm gonna look at a paper and I'm gonna cross something out, I would identify myself as Chamorro. This participant even said she's Filipina Chamorro, but she identifies just as Chamorro. And then another participant said, personally, when people say, oh, I'm American because I'm a US citizen, but the Chamorro, I'm like, really? I don't wanna be American, like I don't want to even say the word. It's not a good word that comes out of my mouth. I don't know. The 2 words I'm an American are never going to be in the same sentence unless there's a not between. Okay, and then 8 of the participants modeled integration. So that's integrating Chamorro culture and the Western culture. So one participant said, Guam is a really weird place to be born. The history and the land, all that stuff just trickles down. It's what my parents had, it's what their parents had. They didn't try to do it, they just did it. And I was here, so that's what I picked up on. I was born into it and that's what I am. I'm inseparable from the place because that's how I was raised, but I'm also American because 120 years of colonization made it so that we picked up a lot of cultural and social norms of being American. Someone just said it's like 50-50 or 60-40. It could go either way. Someone said, by birth, I'm a US citizen. I'm Chamorro, born and raised on Guam. I've been brought up kind of westernized, but also in a moderately Chamorro and Filipino household. There are some things that I can do or that I identify as feeling both Chamorro and American, never one or the other. And then I also found that of the people who felt like they modeled integration, they gave off a sort of conflicting style. So they said that they integrate those 2, but some of the answers were conflicting. So for example, my heart wants to be Chamorro, but being realistic, I'd say I'm a mix because there's a lot of stuff that I think we know or we're aware of and we've experienced that we wouldn't have had if it weren't for our American identity and our ties to America. Like it's so easy for us to travel to some places, whereas people from those places have a hard time just coming to Guam. And even like, actually, I wouldn't be speaking in English right now if we were just totally Chamorro with no outside Western influence. Another person says, I can't say my identity is fully Chamorro because I didn't even grow up thinking that. So I can't totally flip it, even though it's something that I want now. I want to fully claim Chamorro identity, but I can't because I don't know how. And then when I engage psychological well-being with the concepts that I talked about previously, these are some of the examples of the codes that I use. So I used high and low. So an example of high autonomy would be I'm pretty independent. I'm forging my identity as a person separate from the identity that I had as a kid. And low would be I'm very wary of judgment. I don't think I'm very independent. For environmental mastery, high would be I can get things accomplished because I just have that desire to work hard. I'm able to finish all things I need to do. And low would be I'm disorganized and I'm always late for things and I can't find anything. Or if I'm by myself at any place, I go into my shell. High in personal growth would be I'm very welcome to self-improvement. I'm not one to be silly over criticism. I like it. I love new experiences. I'm someone who never really likes to settle. And low would be, in terms of my mindset and perspective of the world, I haven't changed much. I think it comes from my upbringing. high in positive relationships would be, I'm not a doormat, but people can do me wrong and I still look for some good in them. Or if I want to be treated like a queen, the best thing to do is to treat other people that way too. And low is, it's difficult for me to let down my emotional barriers. High in purpose in life, I want to make sure that I'm successful, and I also want to make sure that my family succeeds with me. One of the best things that I look forward to is exploring or discovering between different parts of my soul or different parts of the world. And low would be, right now, I don't think I have much to go off of. High in self-acceptance, everyone has those bad days, but no, I like myself. I think I have a good view of myself. I'm a positive person. I always look for the good in everything. And low would be, I can be really disappointed in myself for most of the time, or some days I'm fine and I'm confident, but most days I think it's negative. And here are the individual scores for my participants. As you can see, we had very little low scores, and we had some participants who got high in all of the different categories. So for the effect of acculturation style on well-being, there were 4 participants who had high in, no, there were 3 participants who had high in everything. One of them just so happened to be one of the 2 people who said that they model a separated style. So one of the possible reasons for that would be because of their social supports, her contact experiences, her congruity between her expectation and her actuality. So basically what she thinks is going to happen and what actually happens is the same, and her accepting that she has the separated style. And then the only other person who said that they had a separated acculturation style, she got a high on 5 out of 6 of the subscales. She had a moderate level of self-acceptance. The high scores on the other things could be, again, because of her experiences with the culture and for her congruity between what actually happens and what she thought happens. 2 individuals who had an integrated acculturative style scored high on all the 6 subscales as well. This could be because they had good social supports, because they accept what happened and they accept the acculturation. So I guess my conclusion was that mastery of integrating Chamorro identity and culture with American identity and culture could potentially lead to improved well-being. Both of them were confident in their identity being the combination of both cultures. So what I took away from the acculturation style on well-being is that mastery of a style, regardless of which style it is, could be associated with improved well-being. Too much criticism or lack of insight into either your identity or culture could contribute to more distress and could negatively affect your well-being. So it doesn't matter if you're integrated or separated, as long as you are confident and comfortable in your acceptance of that style, your well-being could be improved. If you were conflicting, like hindered. All styles, no matter what, included Chamorro identity and claim. So there was no assimilation and no marginalization. Like I showed earlier, there are only 2 low scores. So that's pretty good. That means are we still here? Okay, and there also may be some non-cultural confounding variables that weren't talked about. So lives are really intricate, and culture and personality is also really intricate. There could be some things that I missed that weren't acculturation, that weren't because of how they integrate with the cultures. So that could be something that I look in the future. Okay, and then the most important takeaway would be the effect of Chamorro identity on well-being. All of my participants say that there are ways their Chamorro identity positively affects their well-being and their quality of life. So they think that being Chamorro and expressing that they're Chamorro makes their life better, makes them happier, makes them healthier. So I'll read a little bit of them. Some said, I think I would have a lot less confusion about who I am if I were to better understand my culture. I feel like it's made me more confident with who I am, knowing that I'm CHamoru. Someone said, I think it takes a huge toll on my quality of life and my well-being. One thing I do regret is ever thinking I was an outcast. The decision for me to outcast myself because I felt if I was different, if I were to understand more or learn more, that would make me 5 billion times happier. I think that now that my connection to my culture is getting stronger, I don't necessarily dislike myself as much as I used to. I've been taking steps to improve my health and improve my parts of knowledge that I haven't been aware of before. Okay. Again, it does make me have a real sense of community. I have a sense of responsibility to a certain community, and I think it's important to feel like you belong to a group or to feel like you belong in general. Identifying as CHamoru helps me belong to somewhere, and I have direction, and it reminds me that I have a history. In trying to embrace my CHamoru identity more and trying to participate more, I've met people who are going through the same things and who want the same things. Just being around them is inspiring. And then lastly, someone said, I remember feeling bad for people who didn't have deep cultural backgrounds, because what do they run to? In times of like stress or when prayer just isn't doing it, like really, what do you ground yourself in? I worried about those people because so many times I found myself taking care of myself through the culture, reconnecting with the land, or if I couldn't make out a prayer to God, praying to my ancestors who I could picture. So I always thought about people who didn't have that. I think CHamoru identity saved me in ways that I probably can't even articulate, because there's something prideful, there's something to be proud of when your people throughout history have always been open and welcoming and kind. So to be able to come back to that part of your heritage, it's nice. Even when you feel like you're a terrible person, you can just be like, well, I come from a line of really hospitable people, or who are really strong, intelligent, and persevering. Then you step back into the mentality of, I'm good, I can be good. Oh, there's more. Yes, all of them said something. Growing up, I used to question that part of myself, but now that I'm growing into the woman I'm meant to be, I feel like it has a good effect on myself. Makes it better, our core values like respect. I feel like those things showing up in my life as actions or experiences that I've had a positive impact. I'm able to receive more from the world because of it. Okay, so overall, what I feel like my research can contribute to clinical practice. Again, all participants express that cultural identity has good positive impacts on their well-being and their quality of life. They express that I'm CHamoru, I want to learn more about being CHamoru, I want to express being CHamoru, and that's making me happier, that's improving my well-being. I also found that World War II still continues to affect CHamoru people and CHamoru families today, and intergenerational trauma is still present 3 generations later, so maybe more research could be done into that, and whatever interventions were done with trauma of World War II survivors and their children previously can continue. I hope it hasn't stopped, but continue to the next generation and so on and so on. Exploration of cultural identity and cultural competence should be required of anyone who practices psychology, I think. Anyone who could be receiving psychological intervention should focus in some part on their culture and aspects of the culture of the values. I also think there should be more research, trainings, community outreaches, and professional collaboration. So between psychologists and anthropologists, historians, sociologists, not just from Guam, from the other islands as well. I also suggest preventative measures or intervention in maybe public school. Something as simple as just learning how to recognize your emotion. One of the things that we found was that emotional regulation is not that great. So talking about your feelings, recognizing your feelings, not being afraid to tell people you love them, or you're feeling angry or you're feeling hurt by something. And for future studies, definitely a larger sample size than just 10 University of Guam students. Also, when doing the study, I had to adapt some measures from other American scholars, I think it would be important if the region has its own unique assessment of instruments for psychological well-being and acculturation. A lot of the questions I didn't feel were pertinent to a Guam or a regional audience. And we should learn more stories. We should hear from more people and hear what they have to say and what they've experienced. One of the major things in this research was that when I was looking at Chamorro identity, I did not want to, I guess, prescribe a certain way to be Chamorro because everybody experiences it differently. And I feel that when you are saying this is how to be Chamorro, you have to do this, this, and this, that's buying in to the outsider's perspective on how they classify people. We can't be summarized into some bullet points or a checklist, if you will, of things on how to be. We can just be, and we can be okay with that. So that was really important for me. And what's next for me? Applying to clinical psychology PhD programs in the US, continuing my research about Chamorro identity, Chamorro people, the Marianas Islands, continuing to collaborate, and hopefully returning to Guam as a doctor in clinical psychology and being able to help people with what I've learned and put that focus back into culture. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful, Vana. Thank you so much. That was a lot to take in. But I can relate, and I'm sure a lot of our audience members can as well. And I want to remind them, if they want to pose a question, feel free to do so in the chat. We do have one here, and I'll read it out for you, these comments or questions, and you can address them accordingly. Hi, this is Isa Ariola from the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. I don't have any questions at the moment, but I just want to say what a beautiful project. You should be so proud. Thank you for sharing. And from Daniel,
thank you so much.
Yamagata, he says, do you think that the intergenerational trauma of the people of the Northern Mariana Islands is more intensified compared to others due to being colonized by more than one outside group?
Thank you, Danielle, for this question. I personally do not like to evaluate trauma in a level of scales between multiple peoples. As one Marianas Island, as a region, we've all experienced intergenerational trauma. I'm sure the ways that people in the NMI have experienced it are different from the people in Guam, like you said, because of the different colonial powers that were in play in the NMI. And that can be addressed in different ways. So we need to first recognize that there is these different types of intergenerational trauma, and then we need to work on ways that we can address them individually, address them to their own specific needs. Yes, but whether or not it's more intense and that could lead to more intense intervention, that's definitely possible. There could also be people in other groups, also in Guam, who might have experienced it more intensely. Like one of my participants said, her family was from the southern part of Guam, so they didn't really feel it as much as those in the north. So it could be the same in other islands. Maybe one island felt it more. But then again, like I said, I definitely don't want to say that certain individuals felt more or less. We all went through this negative impacts from our people and from our culture, on our people and on our culture, and they all should be addressed. I hope that answers that question.
All right, we have a comment from Serena Barassi. She says, thank you, Vana. I learned so much from this.
Oh, thank you, Serena.
And from Arlene Yamagata, she says, great presentation, Vana. If it's okay with you, please send a copy of your presentation to yamagata01spn@hotmail.com. Sidus Maasi.
Sure, thank you. This is actually a more condensed presentation than my thesis defense. I cut out a lot of stuff, mostly because it overlaps. So please let me know which one you want to see. I can send both. The other one, more jargon heavy, if you can believe that. I feel like I said a lot of really fancy schmancy psychology words just now. I'm sorry, I did my best. But yeah, just let me know.
And Danielle Yamagata responds to you saying thank you for responding to her question.
You're very welcome.
Magdalena Mesmun says, great information. Thank you, with a heart.
Thank you.
Padme Madrigal says, thank you for sharing your project. It was very insightful and educational.
Thank you.
Again, we're opening up the floor for questions for any of the audience members. Please feel free to use the chat or raise your hand. I'm monitoring to see if you'd like to say your question in person. Okay, we have one coming in right now. This is from Yvette Paulino. She says, thank you for a wonderful presentation, Vana. I'm interested in the tool that you use to assess psychological well-being and acculturation. I teach the Research in Health Science course at UOG. We've collected DASS information and acculturation for a few years now. Would you be interested in developing / validating a tool appropriate for our population? Opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Yvette. So what I use for psychological well-being is I looked at the RIF psychological well-being scales. So the person who developed the concepts for psychological well-being that I talked about also developed two different scales, a fuller instrument and then a shortened one. Myself, my thesis chair and my thesis committee, we worked on, like I said, adapting that to the population and in a narrative way. So we phrase the concepts of those questions more into an interview style. For acculturation, I asked the participants just a question about how they relate or how they view themselves and their identity. So I asked sample questions. I don't remember the exact one off of the top of my head, but it was something like, would you describe your identity as both Chamorro and American, purely Chamorro, purely American, neither Chamorro or American? That was one of the questions. But I'm definitely interested in learning more about the research that you have on acculturation. I couldn't find anything when I was looking for it. Might be because I wasn't looking hard enough, and if it was, I'm sorry for that, but totally interested in hearing about the development and the validation for that, because I feel like that would be really important. Like I said, I did mine kind of just to get a baseline. So if there is already a baseline, I would be super interested in learning more about that. Thank you.
Right. So as we wait for, we have a couple of minutes, I do want to make a comment, Vana. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm a Chamorro from Saipan. There's a lot of the statements, the stories, the testimony that you shared with us that I myself can relate to. I can think about Frankie talking about how the music has helped him on his journey and learning the language.
Yes. JD Crutch, yes.
Yeah, all the oldies but goodies, right? And, there was also one of your participants who was reflecting about developing her cultural identity after leaving Guam for a couple of years. And I can also identify with that, I think, and many who I've talked to here who have had the opportunity to leave island, whether for school or work, for some reason. I'm sure there's good reasons, to cite here, but somehow that seems to also help us clarify, who we are and what our identity is. Because oftentimes you're put in an environment where you become a minority, and you start to ask, wonder, what happened? Where am I? Who am I? Right. I did want to ask. I didn't really pick this up, but perhaps you have a sense of this after interviewing them on their journey toward clarifying their cultural identity. Did you get a sense that it was their reflection on it was frequent and regular throughout their lives. Because there's also that point where you talked about their peers and environment and that influence, and they talked about a shift in the air is the theme you sort of put out there. So is it more recent, the reflection on their identity, or did you get a sense that it was throughout their lives and intense and regular and often?
Okay, so for my participants, I had them tell me their whole story of their identity from start to finish. So I could not have reported all of that in this presentation or even my thesis presentation. But basically, I said start from the beginning and lead me up to now. Tell me everything. I want to know all about it. I want the story of this journey. So a lot of them started in elementary. They said they really didn't think much about it. It wasn't until high school, a lot of them identified high school as the place where they started to learn more, to be invested more, and to actively start thinking about their Chamorro identity. Even so, a lot of them said going into college kind of solidified it. They identified some classes they took at the University of Guam, some professors they had, Guam history. A lot of them said that there were gaps that weren't being filled that made them want to fill them. They wanted to know more. They wanted to learn more about themselves through learning about culture. So that started again in about high school years. And since then, it sounded like it was a constant and a daily and a recurring thing that they would reflect upon.
Well, thank you, Vana. We're just about out of time here. So thank you so much for sharing your work and for your contributions to, of course, our understanding of the Chamorro people and the Chamorro cultural identity. Sizus Maasi and Giliso, to our audience members joining us today. We ask that you take a minute to complete a survey that should pop up in your browser as we end this webinar. You can learn more about this and other events sponsored by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council on its website at www.nmhcouncil.org. I do have to say that this project was made possible by support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Again, thank you everyone. Take care and stay safe. Adios.
Thank you.